to the Fourth Estate. My name is Raymond Mujuni. This is a show that analyzes the press's coverage of news and events, the big stories, the angles they've taken, the sources that they rely on, and the context within which they use to tell the story. And one of the stories that we're going to be looking at very keenly this particular evening is the Kizza Besigye story. Let's start, however, by playing you that story from this week when he decided that he would not be running for the presidential election again.
Decorations at the FDC headquarters indicated that many in the party wanted their three-time presidential flag bearer on the ballot in 2021. And Besigye's fans could not hold their emotions as they waited for him to arrive at the party headquarters. After about 2 hours of waiting, Besigye arrived to cheers. However, his attempt to address the audience was initially blocked as supporters demanded that he first pick nomination forms. Besigye finally made his way to the podium to announce his decision.
It is my humble decision that I have discussed intensively with my colleagues that we get somebody to lead Plan A and you leave Plan B for me. Never ever imagine that I can leave the struggle. Never. If we felt that again, moving with both hands is the most efficient way, maybe we would have done that. But trust my judgment.
The retired colonel, who has been on the ballot 4 times, 3 of which he has stood on the FDC ticket, has in all elections accused the incumbent of rigging the elections.
This country will not be free by Byabakama or whatever he's called, going to Kololo to announce that there is now a new winner who is not Museveni. It is our duty to make sure he lives, whether he wants or not.
Besigye's decision will no doubt have an impact on the outlook of Uganda's largest opposition party.
What has been months and weeks of speculation has come to an end. 4-time presidential candidate Dr. Kizza Besigye has made clear he's not standing in 2021 presidential elections. This leaves the party with 2 options. Patrick Amuriat Oboy, who is the party president, and Chairman Waswa Birigwa.
I'm not disappointed. Why I'm not disappointed? That Plan A and B, the Plan B is better than election, this mere election, scientific election.
Many of us had the hope that he would still come back and hold the flag. Why? He's been around for quite some time. It's going to be a scientific election. And yes, I know we have got strong candidates, but it's kind of going to be even more difficult to sell a new candidate in other areas when it's scientific. Plus, we know that the state machinery always bullies us and does not give us the space.
However, party president Patrick Amuriat Oboy, who has picked nomination forms for the flag, cautioned those who doubt him.
In the next months to come, you are going to see what this villager is capable of doing. It is not the first time that I have been undermined, but I have always placed the press and my critics in their right place.
The country will now wait for the detail of Besigye and FDC's Plan B, which will be announced soon. Edward Muhumza, NTV.
Thank you so much, Edward Muhumza, for that story. And of course, to discuss this big story, we're joined by veteran journalist Timothy Kalyegia. Timothy, where were you when you heard that Besigye wouldn't be running for the presidency again? And what did you think immediately you heard it?
I was actually at the good evening, people, listeners, viewers. was actually at the FDC headquarters in Ajarankumbi, but taking pictures of people as usual. What did I think of it? Well, I got wind that he wouldn't be running again, so I guess I took it in stride, and it made sense if you want an interpretation. I don't know if it's a short answer you want or a long one, but a certain degree of weariness has started creeping in with the thought of a fifth Besigye term. You remember in the last election, all these contributions, the furniture, the poultry being given to him all over the country, that was the peak of his goodwill. I think it made sense to leave that as his final presidential bid. This, especially in the wake of the arrival on the scene of Bobi Wine, was beginning to look like a sad and unwelcome anticlimax. So he lives in just the right moment, but of course, as the show will discuss later, it actually works to his advantage.
I want us, before we discuss the current, let's first delve into the history. You were in the newsroom when Besigye announced his first intention to challenge for the presidency. What kind of euphoria was existing then? How did the media receive his first bid?
It actually, contrary to what it seems now, it wasn't euphoric. It was, you remember a document, or if maybe I don't know about remembering, but he essentially releases a document to be published by the Daily Monitor that essentially helps preempt his arrest and court-martial. So from that point of view, it was exciting to political analysts, to the political section of the media, and I guess a few in the general opposition and the diplomatic circles, to see somebody had come out. But then 5 years earlier, or 3 years earlier to 1999, there had been the drama of General David Tefuza essentially announcing he wanted to leave the army, and then the army said he couldn't leave the army, and then there was all this back and forth in court. So in that sense, it really wasn't the first time a senior army officer with a history in the NRA guerrilla war to have left the army. So it wasn't as big a story as you might think, or welcome as it was for inner circles. It's only when he starts campaigning, people are still suspicious. Many people think, well, but this is a soldier, he was the Museveni's former medical doctor. Is he really out of that, or has he come out to spy on us? And Besigye at that stage, in his very earliest campaign posters and messaging, presented himself a little like the way Amama Mbabazi did in 2015. Yes, I'm leaving the NRM. I still believe in its original principles. And the reason I'm leaving, or at least stepping aside to become a competitor, is because I think we should return the movement to what it was before. So he presented himself as more like a reform agent within the movement, reluctantly stepping outside than a full-blown opposition.
In fact, some of his campaign posters were yellow.
They really were yellow and all that military uniform. So he appeared like a typical NRM person. And because of all the suspicion of moles and the idea of what if he comes out and leads us behind him and then we get arrested, so there was that initial hesitation. The wave, the national figure, the popular man on the street star that Besigye becomes is after the former mayor of Kampala, Nasser Sebagala, throws his weight behind him, and then there comes the basic cliche, you know, the Seya has said, the mayor has said, Sebagala has said. Sebagala gets all his supporters, the Kampala so-called riffraff, the ghetto people, and the common man, and says, I'm handing all this over. So when Besigye becomes essentially the darling of the central region, the Bantu-speaking eastern part of the country, on the back of the support of Sebagala, that's when he becomes what Bobi Wine is today, right now. And I might need to remind viewers that Besigye's actual name, I mean the Western name, is Kiza. It's Kiza, not Kiza, as it's currently spelled. But of course, in the euphoria of the moment, when he starts becoming a star in Buganda and Busoga, and of course he speaks fluent Luganda, people from the central eastern region own Besigye, so they basically style his name as the double Z. And of course, well, if people are going to own you and decide style your name as double Z, why not? So Kiza becomes, he stops being double IZA and becomes I double Z.
Tim, I want you to just help us discuss the kind of media environment that existed then. You were in a movement system. No political parties were allowed to operate at the time. And I presume the newsroom had debates on, does this expand the level of freedom of democracy within the NRM? Is this a challenge that will go beyond the NRM? When you were pitching stories around Besigye, what kind of pitches were they like?
It was still, as I say, it was a stage in 3 years after the 1996 election. I don't know about the political atmosphere, but I guess the wider social atmosphere in the country would illustrate the politics. We had had enough stories published, especially by the Uganda Confidential and the Monitor at the time, of corruption in government and high places. So people from a political background, media, human rights, civil service, and civic groups, that sort of background, we are familiar with the cracks and the contradictions of the NRM. But for the ordinary person, there was still that question of, we are currently enjoying a degree of relative freedom of expression, then very importantly, a growth in the consumer economy. At the time, we were, I think, about our 5th or 6th private radio station, maybe 2nd or 3rd private TV station. Things people had lived all their lives without, from the mid-1970s, the basics, the toothpaste, the Coca-Cola, ice creams and whatnot, were beginning to become fairly plentiful, at least in the main towns. Still scarce up-country, but at least life seemed to be promising. So overall, although there was, grumbling and criticism of the NRM system, many people still felt that they could live with that situation called the Museveni government. They hadn't found a seriously fundamental crisis and problem with it. So Besigye was, on the other hand, seen as, among that limited circle, as kind of a welcome person to challenge the system, which many people perceived as, yes, helping the average person live a better life, but very heavily tilted to Western Uganda, as it seemed to be. Yes, the economy is expanding, but then we hear all the contracts go to Westerners, was the perception. So coming on top and the back of the Sejusa trial of 1996, which for me was the biggest up to that point, the biggest of the insider leaves NRM and challenges NRM stories, Besigye's was a nice addition. But as I say, Besigye alone was seen as he becoming a critical voice within the NRM, much like the way in recent years the late Major General Benon Biraro or Mugisha Muntu was seen. Really part and parcel of the NRM, more like NRM, but just a critical voice within, that's decided to politely step aside. As I say, the fire that becomes Besigye is when all this disgruntled group of people, especially in the central area here, throw their weight behind him. Then he becomes the national hero.
Yeah, help us discuss 1999, when the memorandum comes out from Besigye, which he says he didn't release to the media. He says he wrote it to other people and it leaked to the media. What role did the media play in creating the figure of Kizza Besigye? There were many other generals who were challenging Museveni at the time. Why didn't they get the same?
There actually were not many generals challenging Museveni at the time. There weren't even many political figures at the time. They had discussions. You might be familiar with the story of how groups of the NRM met at the public service in headquarters.
For staying with us on the Fourth Estate, we're still discussing the biggest story of the week, which is Besigye stepping away from the presidential race in 2021 and what that means, of course, for the 2021 race, but also for the politics of Uganda moving forward. Tim, before we went into the break, I wanted us to discuss Besigye post-2001, after he runs in the election. He doesn't win the election, and he has to flee into exile, and the politics gets murky. But the media maintains a story of Besigye and sort of props him up to this prominent figure challenging the status quo. But very little is said around the challenges of mobilizing within the country itself. Very little is said about political parties and the things they were facing that Besigye wasn't facing. Was it deliberate in the newsroom to say that we will focus on Besigye as a story and not focus on his weaknesses or focus on the environment within which these weaknesses present themselves?
Well, you say he did not win the election. Who tells he did not win the 2001 election?
Well, okay, officially.
So that's
yes, but it's a contested matter, and the courts have said it wasn't a free and fair election.
Yes, but the courts, you see, that's answering your question.
Yes.
In other words, you need to understand the history of a newspaper called the Daily Monitor. When Uganda's history is written decades from now, the role played by the Daily Monitor as a paper in particular, in understanding so much of the secret history of this country that dare not be published, so many facts, I mean, the things that have caused that paper to be closed twice and all the cat and mouse games it plays with the regime from the time it was founded, when you get to know what that paper institutionally and individually over the generations, from its founding editors and reporters to, I'm glad to say, even the present generation, just that thing, the DNA of the Daily Monitor, of knowing insider secrets. Then you'll know why, although Besigye is supposedly the runner-up in the election, he's now exiled, and why especially the Monitor, and later, years later, joined by the new radio station KFM, hosting Besigye from South Africa. Why does it do that? Because, as I said, the Monitor, we in that paper who've contributed to it, who listen to newsroom stories, know things the general public doesn't know. So to answer your question, many people felt, well, as I said, there are stories we shall tell, or so the stories that will eventually get published when all this is over. I guess when the government goes, then you'll know why the runner-up becomes the center of attention of the media, because the media might know things that the general public doesn't know. But anyway, either way, he becomes an intriguing person. He's in exile. How he managed to escape becomes another of those stories of mythology. Exactly how he got to flee the country, yet he had been under a supposedly 24 hours security surveillance, itself tells you the other side of Uganda's secret history that you should get to know years from now. You'll get to know how even people within the regime see as much as we see. There are many frustrated people within the NRM, the security system and all that, who will in broad daylight and in public, blast the papers, anti-government and all this, but they also know a useful role it plays. So Besigye, to cut a long story short, remains a powerful force. He speaks from South Africa. He's kept under watch by Ugandan security force in South Africa. His occasional appearances via phone from Pretoria on the Andrew Mwenda live show at that time, and others keep him in the public mind. But he mostly appears on the KFM and occasionally writes a piece or two in the Daily Monitor, but he fades away in many people's minds. There's a vacuum there, and we know the runner-up in the last election is in South Africa, but for the time being, not much is going on. Rumors begin to develop of some kind of rebel group in Eastern Congo affiliated with the Reform Agenda, the PRA and whatnot, but it's unconfirmed, but that's what it becomes. But as I say, because he's that sort of charismatic figure who had aroused the country in 2001, and given the president such a challenge, many people will tell you one of the most violent elections they've seen, maybe the most ever, was that 2001 election. The one that drove the president, to say all sorts of things. There was this interview he had with Time magazine, and he talks about how Winnie Byanyima is a nasty woman and all this, that sort of thing. It really pushed the president to the edge and took him away from his characteristic confidence and bombast into almost going native against Besigye. So if you're not following the political landscape up close, you're not always following these radio talk shows, I guess Besigye sort of faded into somebody in the back of your mind you think about, but not on a daily basis, if you're the average person.
Yeah. If you pause there and we have a conversation on the latitude that journalism has to influence the political process, and knowing that all these things, balance, ethics, or presenting a form of balance, even where it doesn't exist, what role does the media have in influencing the politics of its country? And how does the media play that role? Because we see the Daily Monitor play this fundamental role in creating the right of expression for Besigye, the right to challenge Museveni, who was a sort of mythical figure then. How should the media behave, even moving forward, to create this political space and expand it further?
I don't know how it should. All I know is how it has done it. And once again, as I say, you need to understand the history of that paper called the Daily Monitor. And in 1992, when it was founded, that was what was approaching peak NRM popularity. The 1980s, of course, were gone behind us. The NRM takes power in 1986. Between 86 and 89, yes, in the southern half of the country, this cliche of peace and we can now sleep had become essentially prevalent. Of course, northern Uganda was a very different story. So just as, quote unquote, peace was taking root in the southern half of the country, the northern half of the country was now embroiled in what will turn out to be a 20-year civil war of cruelty by the army, human rights violations, the cutting off of lips of people, a large part of the population actually consigned to IDPs and that sort of thing. So the northern part of the country and the northeastern part, the Teso, Karamoja, and to some degree Arua, have a very different story. But let's say the media was concentrated here. When there was this general feeling of everything was expanding, Uganda was getting international publicity. There was a special supplement on Uganda Music magazine, I think it was April 1991. And this image of Uganda, the land that, you know, fell into a Sierra Leone, Liberia situation, it's being kind of midwifed back to life. And then when the economy starts being opened with the relaxation of the forex trading in 1990, the privatization that begins in 1991, then as I said, the return of these beer companies, the Nile Breweries, Uganda Breweries, back to their owners before 1972, and the general return of basic consumer items to the economy, the NRM government was beginning to gain this general popularity. And then, of course, not to mention the return in 1992 of the traditional kingdoms, the restoration of kingdoms, the July 1993 coronation of Mutebi, the restoration of the so-called Ebiafia to the southern kingdoms. So I guess there's a bit of hypocrisy on the part of Ugandans. The southern Bantu speakers are happy with you when life is okay for them. And even if their fellow Ugandans in the northern part are going through pain. But that's what the atmosphere was here. Now, the Monitor was the one paper. In 1990, in December, the Uganda Confidential had been founded. It's a paper that began pointing a critical eye in all these corruption scandals and cases in the country. 2 years later, Teddy Besigye, the founder of Uganda Confidential, was one of the founders of the Monitor as well. He was part of that original editorial team with the Full Ogutas and Charles Onyango Bowes and so on. So when in the southern part of the country, when there's this celebration here of the restoration of the Buganda Kingdom, the first private radio stations, TV stations, and that sort of thing, the Monitor kept saying, but the corruption scandals in ABCD. In 1992, there was this smuggling of TOW, anti-tank missiles from Florida into Uganda. The Monitor reports such stories. You know, the killings of, the grenade killings of this Professor Mudola, Fred Mudola, and some of the other academics who were part of this, the Constitution Review Committee. In other words, when people are still in this complacent state of, you know, life is getting better, the Monitor was saying, but how about this? How about that mysterious murder? How about that money from this place that vanished? It was asking those uncomfortable questions, and that's why the paper went through a 4-year ban from advertising ban, government advertising ban from 1993 to 1997. So the media did that role. That's why go to the American Embassy here or the Canadian High Commission Nairobi. The papers that are stocked highest is the Daily Monitor.
The Daily Monitor.
It's, for all its weaknesses and contradictions that many of us know and, you know, fight about there, but overall for the nation, it is a paper that kept us honest, kept us focusing on the unpleasant things we'd rather not have discussed in the 1990s.
Tim, I want us very finally to, you were at Najanankumbi when Besigye announced that he wouldn't be called back. He makes this very euphoric speech, very emotional speech, drawing back from almost the days he was in the bush to where it is today. And as a reporter who journeyed almost with him from that point to where he is now, what do you think? What do you make of the events? If you were to make your own personal analysis, what does the future look like? But also, what's the contribution that he has made to the country?
Well, I've written a piece in today's Daily Monitor, you can find yourselves a copy, in which I argue that this was the right time, as I said at the beginning of the show today, this was the right time for him to leave, and the earliest reviews I've seen so far have been positive. Now, there's suspicion for most of the year that Besigye is just like the Museveni criticizes. He's going to come out and, you know, attack Museveni for staying in power, and then he's going to announce, he's going to pretend he won't run, And then as they did in 2011 and 16, he will at the last minute announce he's running for the presidency, in which case then what's the difference between him and Museveni? When he doesn't run now I notice I've been monitoring the media, electronic, social media, the radio stations and so on, and now there's a new appraise of Besigye. There's a positive feeling. He's now seen as kind of like a statesman, which is very good for his image. But remember, he announced at Najjanankumbi his so-called Plan B. That Plan B, to answer your question about the future, is going to be that, as he did discuss with Bobi Wine when he met him, I think it was July, at his home in Kasangati. What he told one of these local radio stations, that's Besigye, and he said, essentially, I've been through all this. The entire system, the machinery, from electoral to judicial to security on the ground, is all captured by the NRM state. Where Bobi Wine is going is where I've been 4 times, including all the tear gas in the exile, the nearly being blinded in 2011, being taken to Nairobi for treatment, all that Besigye has gone through. So for all the current popularity, appeal, and hope being pinned on Bobi Wine, as we've been seeing from last year, he can't even hold a music concert. He can't be allowed to do anything. He wants to have a rally at Kasangati in his constitutional area, where surely by default he should be able to consult without speaking to anybody. He's being blocked. Goes to Lira, can't happen. Goes to whichever place, just can't happen. Goes to Mbale recently, can't happen. Wherever he goes, he's just being constrained. So in other words, the path that Besigye took to this point is where Bobi Wine is going right now. It is going to end, as many of us think, in whatever the turnout, whatever the guarding of votes, however many candidates are fielded, the day, one Saturday at about 5:30 p.m. in February next year, the chairman of the Electoral Commission, Simon Byabakama, in his ceremonial robes, will go through all the rituals of the ABC with all the powers entrusted to me by the Constitution, and now declare that declaration. Most of us think we can win $200,000 in a bet.